Well, a very warm welcome, everyone, for joining us for this National Forum on Disaster Legal Assistance 2023, Insights from Across the Country. My name is Monica Taylor and I'm leading the Climate and Disaster Resilience Project here at Community Legal Centres Queensland.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to see all those faces. I'm Bronwyn Lay. I'm the strategic lead at the Climate Justice Support Unit at the Federation of Community Legal Centres Victoria. And so I will do the acknowledgement today and acknowledge that the traditional owners of the lands upon which we meet and that sovereignty was never ceded. We're coming from such diverse country here on the call. So as sovereignty was never ceded, we all remain accountable to the original laws of the lands that hold us, give us life and enable us to work here and work together. I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country, which is the land that grew me up and enables everything in my life today. I also acknowledge elders past and present and any First Nations people in the room here today. First Nations have been surviving and responding to harms upon country and disasters that have been inflicted by colonisation for more than 240 years. And it's really important to recognise that disaster work is inextricably linked to care for country. And in acknowledging that the lands and waters across this continent were taken without consent, we must also recognise the ongoing struggle of First Nations to remain connected to their country and with kin, and this continues as climate change alters country. I also want to specifically call out the incredible work of Aboriginal legal services across the continent and also those doing disaster work. And the work that they do also ensures the protection of country as climate impacts increase. So back to you, Mon.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Bron. All right, folks, well, we have three clear aims for today's event. The first one is to share lessons and learnings about disaster legal assistance from this year. It has been a year dominated for most of us by flooding. And as we approach December and summer with an official declared El Niño climate pattern, there is a sense of anxiety and anticipation about what lies ahead. We've already seen bushfires in Queensland burn an area of land more than what was burned in this state in the 2019-2020 Black Summer. Perth, I believe, is currently experiencing bushfires, including reports of peat fires that are going to continue to burn underground in wetlands for months to come. And a month after the start of spring, fires also raged across Australia's Northern Territory. And there was a bushfire 4 times the size of the ACT in the Barkly region. So aim number one is really to come together to listen and learn from seasoned practitioners to help prepare ourselves and become ready for summer. Our second aim for today is to enable a growing community of practice around disaster legal help. We know that many of you who've registered and are in the audience today are engaging with disaster legal help for the first time. You are among friends and we are very pleased that you're here, and we welcome your questions, we welcome your curiosity, and we do not presume at all any prior expertise in the room. This area of CLC practice is very conducive to collaboration, and so we hope that we can foster that sense of community today. And the third aim really is to understand and reflect on the distinctive contribution that CLCs play in the disaster recovery space. Our centres have really diverse service delivery models, and the presentations that we've lined up for you are going to demonstrate the real diversity of approach to disaster legal assistance. Back to you, Bron.
Thanks, Mon. I think it's no secret, and we all know this, we don't have to battle this anymore, excuse me, that the disasters we're experiencing are a result of anthropogenic climate change. The best way to reduce the severity and frequency of climate disasters is fast and fair action to reduce climate emissions and restore our degraded environmental landscapes. So I just also want to give a shout out to the CLCs of Environmental Justice Australia and Environmental Defenders Office, who are really vital in this space. However, all of us, whatever we're doing, have a role to play in ensuring climate and disaster justice are realised. I think working with disasters and climate change makes evident that all of our lives, livelihoods, systems and relationships are intimately connected and dependent upon healthy and thriving and resilient environments. It's not nature. This is something that I like to talk about a bit. It's not nature that causes these disasters. There's no such thing as a natural disaster. And nature doesn't cause these disruptions and harms. It's our systems, our laws, economics and politics and ways of living that cause increased stress to the planet and create these disasters. So we are accountable. Our systems are accountable. They're the systems we've created and the decisions that we collectively make cause these disasters. And we work in the law. And so this also means we can also prevent them from occurring, these disasters. I know and I can see that there is incredible knowledge and experience in the room in areas of holistic early intervention and prevention across many areas of legal and community need. Part of our role as CLCs is looking at ways towards systemic change, transformation even. And this work I know is being done across the whole country, including in the disaster space. Tenancy, insurance, family law, financial rights, human rights, they can all be reformed towards the realisation of climate justice. And we here are on a collective journey to understanding CLC's unique contribution to this. We know that our sector can drive advocacy to press for strong action on climate change at the same time as we apply our skills to respond to the long tail of disaster legal need, and we work with communities towards collective resilience. Back to you, Mon.
Amazing. I also, just to pick up what Bron has just outlined for us, want to sort of pick up that working in this space when we emotionally lead into it can be a little bit difficult as the reality of climate disasters does hit home, and coming together is really a very important part of understanding that any disquiet or distress that we might feel about climate change is a shared emotion. It's not something that we need to hold the heaviness of all by ourselves. And really just to sort of also flag that climate and disaster resilience is a long ball game. And the window for action is still open. So in terms of those feelings of despair and hopelessness, it's really not the case that all is lost. There is still very much hope to regenerate and transform the structures and injustices at play. And I really love the author, Rebecca Solnit, and I do want to just share with you a quote of hers, which I think sums it up so beautifully. And she says that people have always been good about imagining the end of the world, which is much easier to picture than the strange sidelong paths of change in a world without end. So I just offer that to you as a bit of a beacon of hope. And now we're going to move very quickly to some housekeeping before we hear from our speakers.
And I'm going to do the housekeeping for you. So we've got a great range of presentations, and it's interesting that from all across the country, which I think is very exciting, all states. We'll hear 3 presentations, then we'll take a break and resume in the second half for another 3 presentations. So each presentation will run for 15 minutes maximum, and this includes question time. And Mon and I will be tyrannical timekeepers on this. So don't be offended if we interrupt you. It's just because we're trying to keep to time. There's an opportunity to ask questions of each presenter, and so you can take yourself off mute to do so. Mon and I will also be monitoring the chat. So if you don't want to take yourself off mute and ask your question in the chat, we'll try and put it to the speaker. The most introverted option you have is to directly message us in the chat, and time permitting, we'll ask your question anonymously for you. We can't promise to cover everything as time is limited, but we'll do our best. So to get the value out of today's proceedings and the amazing fact that we're all together in this one virtual room, we encourage everyone to commit to the whole program, because there is a narrative to it and there's so many different lessons from different spaces and different experiences to hear. The sessions are really diverse, and we hope that we can wrap up around, as Monica said, around the 2.5-hour mark and give back some time to your day. So please remember to all that stuff of keep yourself muted unless you're speaking or asking a question. And I know there's a lot of people who love to see your faces, and I think that also creates the illusion that we're all in the one room, which is nice. So without further ado, we're on to the first speaker, which is Julia Davis, the Senior Policy and Communications Officer from Financial Rights Legal Centre, and her topic is using disaster data for advocacy, insights from the Financial Rights Legal Centre. Are you there, Julia? There you are.
I am. Yeah. Thanks, Bronwyn. Howdy, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully I choose the right screen. Yes, y'all see the presentation? You don't see just yourselves? Okay, tops. All right. Hello. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. As Bronwyn said, my name's Julia. I work at the Financial Rights Legal Centre. I've been there for about 10 years, and we operate a number of telephone advice lines who are pretty high capacity community legal center. Last year, we took about over 11,000 calls, and 3,200 of them were from our insurance law service, so all insurance related questions. Really, what we've noticed in the last couple of years is that no one cohort has really needed more assistance from us than people struggling after natural disasters or what we're now calling extreme weather events. This short presentation is aimed at providing not just some insights into the data that we've managed to collect on the experiences of those clients impacted by extreme weather, but also provide an overview of why we collected the data, how we collected this data. Spoiler alert, it is not easy to collect this data in class, and what we've used it for and what some of the outcomes have been. Go. All right. So what data have we collected? Basically, since the Black Summer bushfires and all through COVID, there have been countless extreme weather events, including all the flooding events that happened in 2022. And we collected information about every single service and client that we've worked with impacted by those events. So the data is both very high level. For example, we can tell that 23% of our insurance calls were related to extreme weather, and also really granular. So, for example, we can now figure out from our data that when someone calls in with a poor claims handling problem, which we know is the most common complaint we get people seeking advice about after extreme weather, we can also tell that it's about poor communications or delay or poor quality repairs. We've figured out things like maintenance, wear and tear, defect, pre-existing damage, disputes, which is usually when a claim's been denied for those reasons. 1 in 3 of our storm and flood clients, that's why they're calling. And it really points to a systemic issue that we can raise. 1 in 5 flood and storm clients have a problem with their cash settlement. So the data we've collected is both quite high level, but also granular in a lot of ways. And we can mix and match it and look at all different permutations of which peril, at what time, what are the complaints, how often is that complaint happening, etc. So why did we collect this data? Basically, back in 2018, we were trying to get ready for a strategic planning exercise at Financial Rights. And we did a lot of interviews with external stakeholders like industry. We obviously work with insurers and banks very often at Financial Rights, but also government and regulators. And we asked them what they thought of our policy and advocacy work. And the key insights were that Financial Rights and our other colleagues in the CLC sector and the consumer movement are really great with anecdotal evidence, case studies of really touching personal stories, but decision makers in government and industry that we want to influence to affect change are numbers people, and they want data, they want numbers, they want figures. So we decided to work on a program of collecting and analyzing data. When the first opportunity came along to test it, that was the Black Summer bushfires. So by collecting service and client data on that event and every subsequent extreme weather event, that meant we could identify systemic issues and trends that arose out of the work that our lawyers and financial counselors were doing. We could inform our key stakeholders in meetings with regulators like ASIC and the insurance industry, including the Insurance Council, really showing that we wanted to be the canary in the coal mine when it came to consumer pain points on insurance issues in this space. And this data has allowed us to advocate for and effect change for consumers, really. That's the goal. How do we collect this data? So, guessing all of you use Class or have used Class, and anyone who has used Class is going to know it's not very easy to extract dependable granular data regarding the services that you provide and for the clients that you work with. So one example that we have a problem with all the time is that we regularly are asked by media industry regulators how many clients are having buy now, pay later problems. And we know for a fact, just from talking to financial counselors here, that basically almost every single caller has a buy now, pay later problem. But the thing is, they aren't presenting on the National Debt Helpline with buy now, pay later as their main problem. They're usually calling in because of an energy bill or a home loan or a credit card issue. And it's only when we dig in do we realize, of course, they have a whole bunch of buy now, pay later they can't afford as well. But Class only lets you put 2 problems in. So when we're first entering the advice, and we enter data into Class live because we are such a high capacity call center, it means that what we're recording is usually credit card, home loan, or utilities debt. And when we try and do a report on buy now, pay later, instead of it coming back saying thousands of people called about this, it comes back saying a couple of hundred, which we know is just not an accurate reflection of what we're hearing on the phones. So what was the solution? Keywords. So I have to give all the credit to my colleague Drew, who would have done this presentation himself, but he's had a conflict. But he came up with this idea, and basically now at Financial Rights, we make our lawyers and financial counselors keyword every single call that comes in, whether it's credit reporting, buy now, pay later, whatever. Everyone knows to put a keyword about what is the topic. And in the extreme weather space, every service has a space for keywords, and you can input as many words as you like, basically. I think there might be like a 25-word limit. We never reach it. And it can describe the issue and sort of think of it as a summary or a meta tag like you might use online. So every statistic that we've collected over the past 4 years on extreme weather events has come from our use of keywords. We ask our lawyers and financial counselors to type into the keyword specific phrases to help us identify which of the services relate to an extreme weather event or something else. And for every single extreme weather event, we have this taxonomy that we make them enter. So they have to enter that it was a natural disaster. They have to enter that it was insurance or financial hardship. They have to enter what type of insurance, so home insurance or car insurance. They have to give us the name of the insurer, Corp, NRMA, whatever. And they have to put in information about the issue the person's calling about. Was it maintenance? Was it poor claims handling? Was it a underinsurance issue? So all extreme weather calls have that taxonomy. So despite producing the taxonomy for them and putting it in Teams and sharing it at every staff meeting, of course, there's lots of errors that happen. We're human. Very few financial counselors and lawyers get it exactly right all the time. It's not their fault. The keywords are manually inputted rather than automatically filled like in a Google search. So people misspell things. They use the wrong words. They use different acronyms or abbreviations. And all the words need to be exactly the same when we export this data into Excel, because that's where we fiddle around with the numbers. So that means before we export to Excel, the data has to be cleaned, which is a very manual, tedious process that Drew and I do whenever we want to use the data. So basically, Drew and I split it up, and we go through every single service, and we click through all the advice notes, read the notes, update and fill in any missing keywords, correct any misspelled or misused words. It takes a long time. For example, to clean the 2023 keyword data that we just were doing for this federal flood inquiry that's going on, took us about 40 hours, we think, between us. So it's no joke. It's a lot of time. Obviously, it's a lot of time for us because we literally have thousands of these services in Class each year. It might be less time for centers that don't do as many services, but there's no easy fix in class. It just has to be a manual cleaning. But then we export the data from class into Excel. Drew gets to like completely nerd it up with pivot tables and counts and arrays and dissect the data in every which way. And from that, we're able to obtain all the insights that I showed you at the start, plus tons more. And how have we used it? So all the hours of mind-numbing data cleaning and analysis, they haven't been for naught. We've produced really good reports. We produced a report in 2021 titled Exposed: Insurance Problems After Extreme Weather Events. And we used that to speak to regulators, industry, regarding all the problems we've identified. It's been really influential with regulators and code compliance committees. We've taken a little road trip through Canberra with it. It has actively influenced, like for example, ASIC has just announced its new enforcement priorities this year, and one of them is going to be insurance claims handling. And specifically within that, they're looking at issues around maintenance, wear and tear denials, which is coming straight from our data. We provided statistics to the Consumer Governance Committee on the General Insurance Code of Practice, and they subsequently produced a report aligning with our insights that we had regarding over-reliance by insurers on maintenance and wear and tear, like I said. Similarly, we've provided all our statistics to ASIC, and they're now really looking at what cases around claims handling they can actually take to court. Oh, what happened?
Oh, Julia, I was just about to say we're at time.
Oh, at 15 minutes.
It's 10 minutes with 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know where my thing went, but that was the very last slide, so that's why it disappeared. So I'm going to start sharing my desktop now. Anyway, that's my presentation. So question away.
Julia, that is so much work, 40 hours. It's incredible. And I know that data challenge is consistent across the country, and there's that class thing. Does anybody have any questions for Julia? Kay, is that?
By all means, feel free to email through questions as well. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, I have a question. Have we looked at asking class, do they have the capabilities to enable us to have those preset words in?
We have asked class that for years, and I think the problem is class is dying now. Yeah, like they're not doing any more custom corrections to it. So we've been putting money aside at Financial Rights to, procure our own CRM in the next couple of years. And this, of course, is at the front of the list for things that the policy team wants in the CRM. It's not going to be the same stuff that caseworkers want, but it is something that we desperately need. Is this the ability for people to just click keywords, right? So that they're automatically spelled out, so that we've put in the keywords we're looking for, and then they can just click, 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 click. And whenever there's follow-up services, those keywords follow the service. That would make a huge difference. It would mean we don't have to clean the data so manually. It would make it easier for the caseworkers too, to be honest, because they're like, what am I supposed to write again? It's like elaborate taxonomy for every type of call. These are people that we expect to take like dozens of calls a day. So it's a lot to ask. And yeah, a better client management system is going to make a big difference, hopefully.
Thank you. Good answer.
Hi, are there any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes. No, or Julie, if you wanted to finish that last bit of your slide that we missed.
No, I think that was the last bit. I think that's why it disappeared. I must have tried to click next and it was like, bloop, gonzos. No, that was it. And so honestly, if anybody has questions, you're welcome to email me. It's just julia.davis@financialrights.org.au. And happy to talk you through how we do it, how we export the data. If you're a data nerd and you know how to do pivot tables, then it'll all make perfect sense. But I can't overemphasize how useful the keywords is. Often we tell new lawyers when they come in before they're ready to be overwhelmed with the taxonomy. I say, if you get a call that really makes your blood boil, or you feel like this just isn't right, just keyword case study. And every so often I'll go in and just check all the services that say case study, give them a read, and think, oh yeah, that's outrageous. This is our goal, is to create a system in our new CRM where we can do a monthly report that's sort of like the canary in the coal mine in financial services. These are the issues that are coming from the coalface. Like, these are the new products that are the dodgiest, and be able to put that out in the public space. That's the goal. But for now, we're manually doing this around extreme weather, and having that keyword data has been so useful. Like, having any kind of numerical data makes everyone just listen. They think you're legit. So it's been helpful, and I use it for credit reporting, bankruptcy, buy now, pay later. We use it across all the topics that we care about, and the solicitors all know, even if they just put in one keyword, that's what matters. Every call is about something, even if it's just an uninsured car accident, which is like 50% of our calls. You never know when ASIC's going to turn around and say, we're investigating uninsured car accidents.
Well, also, I would recommend people to have a look at that report, and maybe we'll include it in the chat, because that is really good and interesting and really important work. Thanks, Julia. Thanks for sharing that. Our next speaker comes from Victoria. It's Simon Sutty, who's the principal lawyer at Gippsland Community Legal Service. And he is talking about progressing towards disaster preparedness in Gippsland. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Bron. I'm just going to try and share my screen, so bear with me for a second while I try and make that work. I don't think I'll be able to see everyone when I do that, so if you could give me a verbal yes when you can actually see it, that would be fantastic.
It's a no. Oh, there we go. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, that makes me feel much better than the no, Bron. Ooh. All right, so as Bron said, I'm the principal lawyer at Gippsland Community Legal Service. So we're a service of Anglicare Victoria, and part of our disaster work is in East Gippsland in response to the Black Summer bushfires. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which we're variously dialing in from today. I'm on the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, but a lot of the work that we've done in disaster preparedness and recovery has been on the lands of the Gunai-Kurnai people. So I'd like to make specific reference to those peoples and extend my respects to their elders past and present. This was, and always will be, Aboriginal land and was never ceded. This is a nice little snapshot of the disasters that we have had specifically in Gippsland over the last few years. So our really intense disaster experience began after the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires, primarily in East Gippsland, a little bit in Wellington as well. So they're two of the 6 local government areas that we service at GCLS. So we've had sort of a mixture of everything. I used to tell people that in the time that I'd been in the role, we had had fires, floods, storms, and earthquakes. And then in the first week of October this year, we actually got all of them. I probably need to take credit personally for the earthquake, because I was in a meeting where I said we had had all of them except the earthquake, and then the earthquake happened that weekend. So that one's my fault. The rest of them aren't. But because of the size of our catchment area and being a RRR CLC, we're quite disaster prone. So we have a catchment area in the east of Victoria of about 42,000 square kilometres. And East Gippsland LGA alone, which bore the brunt of a lot of Black Summer in Victoria, is about half of that. Despite that huge geographic catchment, we only have a team of about 12 lawyers. That will expand to about 14 in early next year. And currently 2 of those lawyers do bushfire recovery and preparedness work, but that team will expand to 4 early next year. This is a sort of side-by-side map of the actual damage that happened in Black Summer bushfires. As you can see, it's mainly East Gippsland. So that red on the left-hand side map is the outskirts of East Gippsland as a local government area. The red on the right-hand side is all the area that actually burnt. So of about 21,000 square kilometres in East Gippsland, about 8,700 square kilometres of land actually burnt in Black Summer. So we lost 346 dwellings, about 850 other structures like sheds and outbuildings. But the damage was so substantial, I think, because so much of East Gippsland is national parks and other protected land. So that makes up about 30.5% of all the land in East Gippsland. So there's just so much fuel for those fires when they occur in East Gippsland, and to some degree Wellington as well. I like to include some photos taken by our staff. So one of our staff members took the photos on the next few slides. In these presentations, I throw around a lot of stats, and they can be a little bit dehumanizing of the actual experience on the ground. So I like to try and remind everybody of the trauma that not just the people living in those LGAs went through during something like Black Summer, but that our staff personally went through. So we are members of our communities, and we've experienced this as well. So those first 2 slides are pictures of the fires coming down on the hill, I think just outside Bairnsdale. And then this one is the aftermath, where you can see those hills burnt out. And this is a bit more of a close-up of what that looks like when you get in a little bit closer. This slide is really, really neat and tidy because it's like the cycles of what everything should look like during disaster recovery. So the one on the right is from, it's basically what Emergency Recovery Victoria actually thinks the recovery effort will be like. So progresses from heroic downwards to disillusionment, and then back upwards to reconstruction over a period of 1 to 3 years. That time frame is just no longer accurate from our experience on the ground. So our experience with Black Summer has been that the time frames are much, much longer. So we still have quite a few clients who haven't even started rebuilding yet, or are in the very, very early stages of rebuilding and navigating a planning system, even though we're 4 years after the disaster itself now. And this is sort of a summary of the main work that we've actually seen come through. I did once think about cleaning this slide up and making it easier to read, but I think it juxtaposes well against those sort of really, really clean cycles that the expectations have, because the reality is just all over the place. Nothing's quite as clean as those cycles make it out to be. A lot of the times our clients will actually be experiencing multiple and compounding legal issues that fit within different parts of those cycles at different times and make that really, really complex to them. So our clients' experience isn't as cyclical as those cycles make it seem. And there's quite a lot that contributes to that complexity. So I probably don't have time today to go into all of that, but I could probably talk for 3 hours about the complexity just by myself. So we did experience a lot of delays in that process. So funding delays initially made it hard to get people on the ground. That adds to the complexity of the legal issues because there's no one to actually assist with them. I understand that's still happening in Victoria, at least with the flood effort, with sort of 12 months before the funding actually comes through. So that's not something that's been resolved. And the likelihood is that it probably won't be resolved anytime soon, considering the funding models that we actually have. But all of that adds to the complexity. And often there just isn't anywhere else for our clients to go in somewhere like Gippsland. So legal aid does have a presence, but they don't do most of these types of law. And they don't have much experience with these types of law. So if we as a CLC can't assist them, there isn't really anywhere else for them to go. And that sort of led us to the view that what we really needed to do in the recovery effort was to listen to communities and see which areas of law they were approaching us with, and almost turn those fixed guidelines on their head, so that the question we were really asking ourselves when we were getting those inquiries was whether we could develop the skills to assist community with those issues fast enough to actually help them. And that led us into some weird and wonderful areas of law that we hadn't really done too much of in the past. So things like planning and environment, land management, that weren't part of sort of our generalist guidelines, but are becoming more and more important there as we move towards preparedness. And this is a shameless plug for a couple of the resources that we developed. So on the left there is the Guidebook to Public Land Management in Victoria that we developed with Monash University's Climate Justice Clinic. And then on the right is our Bushfire Recovery Planning Law Guidebook that we developed with King and Wood Mallisons. So feel free to jump on our publication section of our website and have a read through those. We've tried to devote a lot of our time to focusing on developing those resources, because we had quite a significant amount of investment from pro bono partners like KWM to enable us to upskill in planning and environment and things like land management. So what we want to do is make that as accessible as we can for the rest of the sector, so that they also benefit from our experience there and give a starting point to other CLCs that are jumping into those areas. And this is a shameless plug for the Public Understanding of Law survey by the Victorian Law Foundation. So we were lucky enough with our work that it coincided with the VLF's work with Pulse. So the Public Understanding of Law survey actually directly surveyed Black Summer bushfire survivors in Eastern Victoria, and primarily, I think, in East Gippsland. So there's lots of scary things in those findings for legal services, but the main ones for disaster, I think, are summarised on that slide. So more problems of all types, longer problems, they're more severe, and there's a greater use of legal and non-legal services by people who have been through that trauma. But the big one is that they rarely actually link those legal issues to the bushfire itself, which means that we might need to do a lot more work in terms of partnering to make sure that those issues are actually being addressed. And this is just sort of a visual representation of the increase in legal issues after Black Summer in East Gippsland, again, pulled straight from Pulse. So this brings us towards the preparedness discussion, I think. So this is a quote from our submission to the National Legal Assistance Partnership Review. What we see on the ground is real distinct funding between preparedness and recovery work. And the experience of our clients is just that those things are constantly overlapping. So if you remember back to one of the first slides where I summarized the disaster events, the reality now in East Gippsland is that we're always going to have a next disaster. They're getting closer and closer together to the point where we've just recently had all of them in 1 week, which doesn't bode well for the rest of summer, but the lines are blurring between those cycles for us, at least in Gippsland, so that we need to really call that out with funders. What you're funding by funding preparedness is actually also funding the recovery work, because they happen so quickly, it's so close together within Gippsland.
Simon, can I sound a bell?
Sure can. This last one's just a summary of the preparedness work that's just been funded by the Legal Services Board that we will be starting in December. So formal start for that project will be December, and I'm sure I'll have lots more to say about that in the future.
Thanks, Simon. The work that you do at incredible. So it's really great that this is shared with a wider audience as well. I was wondering, would you be able to stop sharing your slide, Simon, so we can see if there's any questions from Or if Monica, can you see any questions there? I can't.
There's no questions in the chat, and I can't see any hands up at this stage. So, Bron, fire away if you have a question.
I do. I mean, I think that squishing or the smush of all those different cycles, and we have that mismatch between preparation, response, recovery. I do have a question in terms of how did you change your program delivery, your approach, as a result of that smush and having to do many things all at once?
Yeah, I think that was something that happened quite naturally when we scaled things back just to what the communities actually needed from us. So much of that early work is community development work that you're going to be in for a very difficult time in that work if you're not listening to the community and giving them what they want. So that really gave us the opportunity to see whether that married up with what we were expecting to see. And then we just maintained that throughout the life of the program so far, which has meant that we've constantly been reassessing against what the community needs. So really, I think the pulse data just confirmed the complexity of what our communities were actually experiencing. So it was sort of like reading a report that confirmed everything that I'd been thinking and saying for the past 3 years in terms of the complexity. And it's really challenging because so many of the funders are really attached to those cycles that it's hard to actually break them away from it. And although they're really useful for us to understand at sort of an intellectual level, the disasters themselves and the ways communities actually experience those disasters just aren't tied to that intellectual understanding.
It goes back to what Julie was saying before about the importance of data to confirm the reality. Kelly, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Simon, I have 2 questions. The first one being you touched upon the funding issue. I'm a financial counsellor, we experience the same issue. Have you had any positive feedback from funders and government that going forward there may be some change in that funding model to keep in the industries the skills and knowledge, people with the skills and knowledge that have been acquired in this sector, in disaster recovery sector? Sorry, I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah, that I almost laughed a little bit there. I shouldn't laugh, but there's rarely any feedback from funders about positive or negative things if you're doing things well. I think they tend to focus mainly on the things that you're doing poorly. So we've been doing a lot of that work internally, trying to come up with ways that we can actually retain all of that knowledge. And we were lucky enough through the Legal Services Board grant that we're now funded for preparedness work for the next couple of years for 2 of our lawyers, and the 2 lawyers that we did have doing that recovery work will transition over to those preparedness roles. So that secures that knowledge for us for the next couple of years, but it's very ad hoc at the moment, and I don't think funders have come full circle to the point where they realise quite how specialised the knowledge is in these areas. So we're constantly trying to reinforce that, and I do think it's worse for financial counselling than it is for legal. So we also work alongside Anglicare's financial counsellors, and their funding is a lot shorter and harder to maintain and less clear than ours as a CLC, and that's not saying much because ours is absolutely terrible as well, and could benefit from longer time frames and the like, but financial counselling is even worse. Yeah.
It is, yeah, thank you. My second
Commiserations.
Question, yeah. I'm a small business financial counsellor, so we only work with small businesses, and when we take on a client, we work with their personal and their business finances. I currently work in the Rochester region in flood recovery, and it's a frustrating situation for businesses being able to access services because they're not eligible for anything. Unfortunately, we can't get assistance for them through community legal centres either. Do you have any statistics or records, because I know Gippsland's been so impacted by disasters, do you have records on inquiries from small businesses, or
I don't have
any
records on
feedback about
inquiries,
them
but we
reaching
have
out?
run CLE, so community legal education, directed more at that. So as part of Anglicare, we do have connections with things like financial counselling and their network. So we have been able to pull together some of those resources to benefit primarily primary producers. So that was part of the initial funding agreements that we received for Black Summer, a focus on trying to do what we could for them. So I think we've we've tried. We don't have any data about the number of people involved, but I would expect it would be very, very high just based on the stats and the actual geographic configuration of somewhere like Gippsland. It's really, really challenging because a lot of the areas of law are very, very specific in terms of their expertise. So they're not necessarily something that we actually have for primary producers. So we can do things like develop community legal education, but it's much harder to actually give any substantive advice because we have to actually build the skills internally first to be able to do that. And our staff just don't have that commercial background. So now when we recruit, we do look for that additional skill set to be able to help small businesses and primary producers as well. Because the reality for us in Gippsland is that even though they might be asset rich, there's absolutely no way that any of them will ever be able to afford a private lawyer anyway. And then the pool of private lawyers is so low in Gippsland that there isn't really anyone for them to go to. So we are trying to build that into our service provision, but it's one of those things that takes time because you need the funding to bring somebody else on. And then if you really want to do the work well, you need to dilute that experience down into the rest of the staff so that everybody can do a bit of it as well. So we're working on it, but no, I don't have anything formal to be able to help you with, aside to say that we have noticed the issue and we've done some education work around it, but we haven't been able to touch the substantive stuff as much as we would like.
Thanks, Simon. That is fantastic. It's a good place to close off on the Victorian experience, and particularly drawing on those workforce issues and the reality of we're at 4 Rs now: rural, regional, remote, and very remote legal service delivery. Thanks,
I always
Kelly.
say 3 Rs because we aren't the 4th R. So we're not very remote, we're just remote. So I don't like taking the other R because my catchment isn't actually part of the other R.
Well, that is probably a perfect segue to our next speaker, because speaker number 3, I'm going to very warmly introduce now. So we have David Curry. We are shifting lenses completely, folks. We're heading to WA now, and David is the Organisational Development Lead for Marnin Wundagura Women's Resource Centre. So he's going to address us about disaster legal assistance from an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation perspective in the context of the Fitzroy Crossing floods. So over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Monica, and everyone, and thanks, Simon. We are the 4th R that sits in the 4 Rs. Look, I might just play a little video whilst I introduce us and our service, what we're all about here. So I've got to commend you, Monica, on your pronunciation there of Marnin Wundagura. It is a women's resource centre, Aboriginal community controlled organisation, which I know begs the obvious question about why the one white fella employed by this service is the one coming to speak to you all today. And the answer that I always give to that is because I'm the most expendable. Our board, our CEO, our other senior staff all carry cultural and community obligations and burdens that I just don't. So that's the reason I've come out to speak to you. What you're seeing is where I used to take my little son there fishing under the bridge just a year ago. And of course, should explain, Marnin is a word that means women in Walmatjarri, one of our traditional languages here. Wandi means big mobs, and Gura meaning belonging to. So when it's said like that, as Monica said, Marnin Wundagura, it literally means the place belonging to big mobs of women folk. So it is a women's resource centre, part of which is a FVPLS, a family violence prevention legal service. So in January of this year, we experienced the worst floods in over 100 years, the worst recorded flooding in the Kimberley in the history of WA. My houses, all of our houses, are not far from this place. And a lot of the experiences I heard reflected from Simon and Gippsland are scarily ringing true for our experience here as well. So this is as the water started to come up. And we had some folks on the phone at this time to our friends in Perth and in Canberra at the various bureaus saying this river is going to flood. And we were assured time and time again that no, we've crunched the data and that's not what's going to happen. And the old people saying we've never seen the water come up like this, it's going to flood. and were repeatedly told no. Anyway, of course, it did flood, the worst flood in recorded history, and it cut our town off for a matter of weeks, collapsed the one road in and out. And we are very remote. You know, we're conveniently located 450 kilometres from our nearest Woolworths supermarkets. And we rely on that bridge and that road that you're seeing there to be able to access it, for children to be able to access schools, for families to be able to access healthcare and services. So this provided us a huge problem for the town. I just wanted to share some of our reflection and experience here. And I'll got to say, look, I don't mean to sound critical, but I do want to be honest. And I have had the discussion recently with our friends in the department and the legal assistance sector about what I'd be sharing today, because it's not about being overly critical. I'm just going to stop that share. I won't be a minute. But just to be open with you all about what our experience has been. So our geographic area is about 2 times the size of Victoria, 3 times the size of the United Kingdom, with a very small team. So it's you know, geographically a very big area. Our town is a service hub, and we service about 30 odd remote communities that sit around us as well. Our population and our client base is 85% plus Aboriginal. And I don't know if it's linked, but our region also voted 85% yes for the voice. So I'll draw from that what you might. The first kind of reflection we had is that when this started happening, that the offers of help started rolling in. And that's really lovely on one hand and an unbearable burden on the other. And what I mean by that is, at the time that we were responding in a crisis, so for our staff, for our community, our centre wasn't inundated, so it was being used as an evacuation centre, and very shortly after, a headquarters for the State Emergency Service and Department of Communities before they were able to establish a hub. It wasn't long before the legal assistance sector came along and said, we've got a model that we're going to impose, and we've been asked to do it, and we would like our agency to be the coordinating agency for that. At which time we said we really don't have the capacity to do it, because we're responding to our staff are all redeployed. You know, we were literally doing welfare checks on people, preserving other resources in town. I like Simon's pictures. I'll show you another one. So this is what our staff are doing at the time. So this is, you know, rescuing cultural artifacts and artworks from town that are really, you know, culturally significant documents and paintings and things like that. So when we were called by the department to say, would we coordinate the recovery, the legal response to this recovery, our answer politely was, not right now. Please find someone else. Please find the resources to do it. And what I would say this started to do was hold up a magnifying glass to some of the disconnect and conflict. You know, obviously the temperature was really dialed up anyway in terms of what we were experiencing. And as Simon reflected, we are of our community. These are our staff right here. So we are affected by the disaster as well as leading a response to it. There were so many meetings, working groups, response groups, task forces, like we just couldn't keep track, and we couldn't get representation at all of them, which means we probably missed some vital information and having some input along the way. And it's really crucial that we did that fact checking on the ground. You know, I was just saying that when our people were on the phone saying that the river was about to break its banks, and we were being told by people sitting off site that no, it wasn't. Similarly, we were hearing from workforce updates. I remember being on one where they said, well, there's only 12 people that are remaining in town at the evacuation centre, and those people wish to remain there. And I knew that our staff that day had done welfare checks and delivered food to at least 30 households, at least, because we had it documented. So I asked them, where is your information coming from? Oh, we've had it verified. And I said, by who? Give me their name, because I'll go and see them right now and we can compare notes. The responses you are planning are not matching reality. So a lot of our job then became brokering information between the various response groups and government and what was actually needed on the ground. So it was really difficult. If I had a reflection on this, it would be to try and set up those roles and responsibilities very early. So who is responsible? Who is being communicated to? Who is being informed? We knew that we didn't have the capacity to do it, but by relinquishing the control and legal aid stepped in and took that responsibility at the time, they filled a void, which I really appreciated, but which probably came to deliver us a bit more complexity and issues down the line that we hadn't anticipated either. The response that then came in, as I said, there was this model. The government announced $4.1 million in funding to the legal assistance sector to solve a problem that we hadn't agreed we had yet. And what do I mean by that? Well, they came with a list of priorities from Kalbarri, where they'd had some learnings from a previous flood response, and they imported them into the Kimberley. And those areas are not as far away as we are from the rest of you, but they're far away enough to be fundamentally different. What do I mean by that? There were priority areas identified, such as insurance issues, mortgage and debt, motor vehicles. Those were 3 of the top 5 priorities, which sounds wonderful. And in Kalbarri was probably very relevant. But in an area like ours, insurance isn't available, let alone taken up by people. There are no mortgages because people don't own the homes that they're in, with primarily tenants. And motor vehicles were only recognised if they were registered. And other than corporations such as us, most of the mob vehicles are not registered vehicles. They still have a huge value in community as a resource, but they weren't recognised as an asset because they weren't, registered vehicles, so therefore weren't able to be compensated. So we came back and said, hey, you've made a bunch of assumptions here about what the community needs, but has anyone actually stopped to ask and to do that needs analysis? So a lot of our resources then were really asking people to pause and do the needs analysis first. This is important because when the government gave this $4 million, they gave it to a bunch of agencies, generalist and specialist services, who were then, and it came with a condition that a time frame that you needed to spend and acquit the money and report a result. So we very quickly had other agencies who really wanted to help, and we're talking about booking trips, booking vehicles, and coming on up, and we had to ask them to please stop. That was a strain at the time. We were rationing fuel, we were rationing food, sewerage wasn't connected, we were rationing power. So the last thing that we wanted to do was to import a workforce that would diminish the already scarce resources that day to day. We were negotiating with our neighbours and other agencies about who'd fill their vehicles and jerry cans up that day and who'd leave fuel for the next day. So the last thing we wanted was a bunch of folks with really good intentions coming into the region and depleting resources unless they were able to, source it and bring it from outside. So having that community-led voice and asking the response to slow down was a key challenge, and one that we were constantly and continue to be challenged on by the department. And I understand funding's been announced and we want to report a result for government. What we've decided to do and how we've been able to work together to reframe that is to say, we don't believe that this natural disaster or weather event has produced $4 million worth of a legal need. But what we do know is decades of underinvestment in this region and in this sector means that we think we can make a case for what good service delivery looks like ongoing, and we'll use this money and we'll collaborate with our specialist services and our partners there to prove the model and why this now needs to be a base level of funding for our sector and for our region. So that brings me to the third thing. So if I think the first thing is responsibilities, the second thing is around the responses and that they really need to be community-led. The third thing I want to talk about, and it leads on from what Simon said, is around resources. To call this a flood response now, it's just about to rain again. We're just about to start our next wet season. We're yet to see a dollar. So even the funding that we were pressured to resource for in February that was announced in July, we've not yet received. I realise I'm coming up on time, Bron. The money that the community can access through the Lord Mayor's Fund has not yet been announced. There were some smaller $1,000, $5,000 packages as emergency relief, but in terms of this recovery and resilience building, we're yet to see the money. Our organisation and other organisations, including Legal Aid to be fair, resourced up and have carried a debt on a promise, and have now had to carry that through a financial year, which means we explain to our boards and our various agencies why while we've carried a debt on a government promise. And these are all, feedback that we've given back to our friends in the department. So be prepared to wait for that money at an organisational level, for the legal assistance, because we have a bunch of other programs, and even for our community members to be able to access the help that they need. Even after we had everyone from the Prime Minister down come and grace our door and promise whatever it needs and whatever it takes, and here he is now with the Premier at the time, with our CEO in the middle there, Emily Carter. You can see Senator Dodson there off to the side. We had every government official from the Prime Minister to whoever opens his mail come and visit with us and make promises. We're just waiting for that money to ever hit the bank account. Look, I'm just very aware of time. Like Simon, I could talk for another hour on this, but I hope that just share some reflections, sort out who's responsible, sort out who is leading the response, and that must be community-led. And then work out when and where, as an agency on the ground, you need to direct the resources and not have them directed by anyone else, be it a government Department of Justice, legal assistance, or an outside agency. It really is incumbent on us as members of the community. That's our role and responsibility, is to direct those resources. I hope that's been somewhat of a helpful reflection. I don't know.
Amazing. Dave, thank you so much for being such a compelling and powerful spokesperson for your community. You've really brought to life what we sort of bang on about, these abstract notions of disaster injustice. You've just painted a really, really clear picture about what that looks like on the ground. And I'm sure everybody really heard you. There's some comments coming through in the chat. Does anybody, we are sort of due for our break, but I am going to just see whether there's any questions before we go to a break for Dave, because that was probably very question worthy or comment worthy.
All right, it's similar to Julia. I'm happy if people want to email me or message later on down the line. That's fine as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, terrific. Let that settle, let that land. Now's probably a really good time to reflect on what we've just heard. We're going to take a 10-minute break. So by my watch, it's let's call it 5 past the hour, and let's aim to be back at 15:15. So 10 minutes to go stretch your legs, grab a coffee, go to the loo, and please come back into the room, because we have another 3 terrific presentations and then a wrap up. All right, see you all soon. All right, so we have traversed New South Wales, Victoria and WA, and now our next presenters are from Queensland. So I am very pleased to welcome Jackie Kavanagh from Caxton Legal Centre and Magda Zenius from Hub Community Legal, and they will be talking us through the buyback scheme that has taken place here in Queensland. So over to you, Jackie and Magda.
Let's see if I can share. Hello, everyone. My name's Jackie. I'm the flood recovery lawyer at Caxton Legal Centre, and Magda is in a similar role at the Hub Community Legal. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet today, and we're on the Turrbal and Yuggera lands in Brisbane. Magda and I are both in Brisbane. So just to give you a sense of where we actually are, I'm in inner city Brisbane, and Magda's basically between Brisbane and Ipswich, which means we had a lot of clients after the February 22 floods, and we both kind of joined or rejoined our organisations at that particular point. But our services, while they are city-centric, we do service clients across the state. So by phone, we will speak to clients rural and regionally as well. We're here today to talk about Brisbane's or Queensland's Resilient Homes Fund, which does have 2 parts to it. So up on the screen, we've got some of the goals and where the money came from. So it was from a shared government initiative. And then it was actually administered by 3 arms of government and multiple government agencies, just to make it really straightforward. So it was promoted by the key authority was the Queensland Reconstruction Authority through the media and government and council channels. They did a number of town halls across at least southeast Queensland, which was a good opportunity for us to come along and show the support organisations that could be there as well, including financial counsellors and neighbourhood centres and all of the sort of the wraparound services. The authority also did some door knocking to survey people's recovery progress, and the Resilience Home Fund was promoted at these events. Although I have heard on the grapevine that this led to some confusion where some clients thought, or some customers thought they had registered, but they hadn't actually. A lot of the registration was online and on the phone, and that of course has accessibility issues for people who aren't that comfortable being online or aren't that comfortable working through large government organisations. So from our perspective, every single client we said, have you registered? And the registrations have now closed, but the program will continue for a couple more years. The funding covers, I put it into two streams. So I'll talk a little bit about what I call the resilience work, and then Magda will talk more about the actual buyback scheme. So the resilience work actually comes out of regulations, which are listed up there, but it was nice to be able to actually find the regulation and point to it and know what was going on as a lawyer. There were three streams to the program. The first is a retrofit program where the materials in your home were checked. They would fund the materials in your home being more able to be, cleaned up and make it through the next flood. The home raising program was, as it's in the name, and people received a certain amount of funding to raise their homes above the council floodlines. And the demolish and rebuild program was only a very recent addition. So it wasn't always on the table for people. And then we have the voluntary home buyback, which Magda will go into more details, but it is a pretty much entirely discretionary scheme where both parties, the community member had to be willing to take part and the council/state government had to be willing to offer it in the first place. So it was quite a restrictive, it wasn't hugely offered, really. That's right. Yeah. So the registrations, the clients all started in the same place to actually work through this program. So they would register online and then they'd wait a decent amount of time. People would come out from the Queensland Reconstruction Authority and assess the home. They'd then receive a document that said what you were eligible for. It didn't necessarily say what you weren't eligible for, that was implied, but it did have some quite useful information in it in relation to what you could do at your home to prepare it for the next event. People could be offered more than one offer, so it could be a buyback and a refit and a raise. There was no knockdown of that in the early stages. And there was some good guidelines, I think, about how you could go about making that happen. So they'd register, they'd get the assessment, you would pick a stream and then you would move forward in the stream. If it's the buyback, this is all happening without the valuation. This is just a very initial, which path do you want to go down? So a little bit of work has happened before you even kind of pick a team. I went to one of the town halls at some stage and I had this great poster on the wall about what comes next. And it was a 10-stage process to get from picking a box to ending up with your home redone. So unsurprisingly, these are pretty complex processes. It's a lot of information to digest the practicalities of how you're actually, what does it look like at the end of the day, and B, how are you going to get there? And that is not that easy for people to do. Before you go through any of the processes, you tended to need your insurance disputes resolved. And we all know that they have been quite time consuming, and AFCA is time consuming. Only 2 of the insurers up here actually agreed to do the resilience work. And to be fair, I didn't take anyone through that process, so I don't know how seamless it was. But it was only RACQ or Suncorp. And if you were with anybody else, you really did have to take a cash settlement from the insurer before you went ahead with this work. And of course, for those of us who work in an insurance space, we'll know that taking a cash settlement is not necessarily a bad option, but there are certain risks that come with that, where you wear the responsibilities and you just have to project manage your own build. And honestly, the project management of this is really overwhelming for a lot of the clients that we had. Your insurer's temporary accommodation payout would generally only cover the insurance work that had to happen. The program was changing over time, and I think Magda might touch on this as well. They were quite responsive to feedback, which was great, which is now why the demolish aspects there. This was also pretty stressful for clients who had picked a path and moved down a path and then had something else put in front of them. And again, the overwhelm and decision complexity was quite high for a lot of clients. There's a massive trade shortage, which is news to absolutely no one. But really, clients who were tradies themselves or had family and friends or were trade literate or had done a renovation were much more able to work through the process, know who to call, know what needed to happen, to be comfortable and confident with all of that. A lot of other people, that was new and foreign to them. Participants were required to outlay money and contribute their own costs, although there are some hardship schemes around that. But overall, it was easier for higher income households to navigate and for people who are comfortable with the building process. And due to the complexity of all of these processes, we really saw the value in, at Caxton, we have our own social workers, but the Queensland government's eventually, they had some people within community recovery, and then they shifted that function to a lot of the neighbourhood centres around. Magda will touch on this as well, but the service navigators were invaluable for making sure that, and just for letting the community know what was happening, but for those clients and customers who were finding it difficult to navigate and find builders and just know what was going on and get emails, there was someone there to support people through. And I say that like it's a past tense thing. It's still very much work that is being done by the neighbourhood centres around our areas. And then the other significant part of the scheme was the home buyback scheme.
Yes, and the voluntary home buyback scheme responds to the stark reality that in some flood-prone areas, the risk to residents during floods is extremely high. And standard flood defense measures might not be cost-effective or even feasible. And the program offers homeowners a pathway to salvage properties affected by floods. The houses are then demolished or removed, and the land is reshaped to align with flood's natural dynamics. Following 2022 floods, the Queensland and Australian government jointly founded the program, which is managed by the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. And the homes in high flood risk areas are selected on the following criteria: the extent of damage from recent floods, the risk of future flooding, and also socioeconomic factors to ensure that the most vulnerable community members receive adequate support. And the next slide is a bit busy, but in a nutshell, the process begins with the homeowner's expression of interest, and the QI then arranges a property valuation of both current and pre-flood assessment, and the homeowner is offered the higher value. Obviously, homeowner can choose to arrange their own valuation, and once settled, the ownership of the property is transferred to the local council. As far as data is concerned, it shows that only 12% of all properties registered as flooded were identified for buyback, and only 38% of planned buybacks were finalized within 18 months after the floods. And it shows how long the process is.
It is. We'll just really quickly touch on, there were appeals mechanisms which we assisted some people through. We're actually doing better time than we thought we would. Again, because these are two, while it's all one fund, there are two sections to the scheme. So the resilience work because it sat in the legislation, had a clear appeals mechanism, no administrative review. Judicial review is an option, but never, well, one that I didn't find I had clients that were likely to succeed through. But the schemes were quite responsive to feedback, and so continuing to talk and do a bit of self-advocacy did lead to some change for some clients. And
yes, and regarding the buyback, it was important that homeowners were provided with explanation of a decision in relation to the criteria. It was quite important. And with buyback, we have multi-layer of internal review mechanism. The option of external review would be under Judicial Review Act.
And I will say the decisions were quite technical. They were really about the house and what happened at the house. So engineering and, you know, numbers based. The circumstances of the client weren't really something that was important. It was very much that I think most places had a list of the highest risk rated homes and how far the flooding happened in this event, and were pretty much working down the list depending on if people wanted to go ahead or not.
So the introduction of the buyback program was met with interest, and every participant appreciated the chance of selling the property at pre-flood prices, which obviously lifted by worries about the future risk and also rising insurance costs. And the program also resonates well with people who suffered emotionally, were traumatized because of floods, providing them a new, fresh start. However, buyback presents its own challenges, and it's really demanding process that hinges on local government cooperation, particularly for accurate flood risk information. And also funds received from buyback don't cover the cost of a new property, forcing many to decide between remaining as property owners in the flood zone areas or becoming tenants in the safer locations. Also, navigating the process itself can be very, very challenging, especially for those with limited financial resources. And for example, costs of relocation and independent valuation are not covered. Importantly, the later independent valuation is reimbursed on successful settlement. I would like to also highlight the information offered by regional service navigators, and that there are not enough resources in some regions, and also there is disconnect between the program and the realities faced by disadvantaged regional communities. And therefore, the service navigators, people who assist with the grant process, has become indispensable and play a very vital role here.
We are both big fans of the local neighbourhood centres.
Yes, we are.
And I guess just, Nagda did touch on this, but for clients, there really is a difference between, am I getting a fair value for my property, and am I getting enough money to live the life that I am living now in a safer part of my community? Generally, for the lower income people, the answer is no. And I understand why a government scheme is careful with its money and doesn't want to, you know, pay more than someone's house is worth. But there are real challenges for lower income people and people on fixed incomes who can't then go and get a loan to allow them to live wherever they want. And they need to be prepared to either leave their communities, and some of them were not willing to do that, and some of them thought that they could resell just in the open market and make more money. And you really have to kind of question if the amount offered isn't meeting the goals. You know, it was a voluntary scheme, so nobody, I'm about to contradict myself, was forced into it. But yeah, the dollar value meant a lot to a lot of people and was a bit of a challenge for some people. I just wanted to throw up a bit of a case study. The schemes were quite responsive to, like, to be very fair to the people administrating this, it was announced, and then I think they did, you know, they figured it out afterwards. It was at least the understanding from the outside. So they were quite open to conversations and responding to issues. There was a set of townhouses in a part of Ipswich that was in the, you know, in a very flood-prone area, and their homes were very damaged. But because it was a body corporate, it was just an interesting example of the scheme interacting with another area of law to throw up a pretty major complexity. I know body corporate law is not that exciting, but the stance, at least at the time in Queensland, but there are proposals to change it, was that in order to terminate a scheme, you needed 100% of people to say yes to that. Otherwise, you had to go through quite a difficult Supreme Court process. In this particular complex, lots of the owners wanted to do it, but not everybody. And so there was a challenge there that how could you have a voluntary scheme unless you had 100% of people willing, and 100% of people weren't willing. There was a lot of advocacy by the residents. They did a really good job. And the council, I think, was very open to the fact that this wasn't quite the right area for people to live in. The right thing to do was to probably remove this bit of land from the market. And so after quite a lot of lobbying, the scheme and the council and all the various parties agreed that there could be some compulsory acquisitions if needed in this complex to get this over the line. So it was a pretty complex issue, and I can't say it's in the media, so it's not something that we necessarily had a lot to do with, but it was an interesting example of them responding to feedback and also just the complications of other laws out there in throwing up the unexpected, I guess.
Thanks, Jackie. And Magda, you are at time. So can I invite you to wrap up, please?
So while the current buyback program is a critical step to recovery, however, we think that it's a strong argument for taking proactive measures before the next disaster hits. And for example, working with council to identify the homes, funding, ongoing funding and training support services, also advocating for very responsible land use and taking proactive steps.
And we are very open to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. If you can stop sharing your screen, we'd be able to see your faces and everyone else's. I can't see any questions in the chat or any hands raised. I think that point about low-income people, you know, missing out on the full benefits of a government scheme because you really need to have money to be able to take advantage of what the scheme is able to fully offer is a really salient point. There is a hand raised. Julia, if your question is quick, I'll allow
it. Yeah, look, quick enough. I just think by making it voluntary and not mandatory, I'd be interested, since you were in the community. Obviously, the problem with making it voluntary is you have all these homes that the government has identified as being too risky to live in and offering buybacks. But then people just stay, and even worse, sell them to new buyers who might have no clue how dangerous they are, and the cycle continues. So, you know, from your experience, if the scheme had been mandatory, I know that's unpopular, do you think it just would have blown up in everyone's face? Like, would everyone have just appealed it, or would that have been a better solution?
I think you'd have to have a different objective. I think it being voluntary was reassuring for a lot of people that they felt they had control over the process. Obviously, we are also in a housing shortage, which is a complicating factor, and taking out too much housing stock has its own challenges. I think if you were going to run a compulsory scheme, you'd really have to do it in advance of it. You'd have to do it as a preparedness task, that people had a lot of time to prepare.
I agree.
I also don't claim to be an expert, but I think it being voluntary was probably the right thing in response to the community. I think if we want to take out housing stock, we need to plan it.
Learn more and actually
Thanks for that. Look, I can see Trish has her hand up, but unfortunately we do need to move on because we have 2 extra speakers. So Trish, I'd invite you to pop your question in the chat, or I'm sure Jackie and Mag would be very happy to receive emails. I can see them nodding. Thank you so much. A really interesting example of a scheme that I don't think, is unique to Queensland. It's not running over different states and territories. So useful for people who might be anticipating something similar down the track. I'm going to hand over to Bron to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Monica. So I'm excited to introduce, we're going to South Australia now and going to Georgie Portis from the Riverland Community Justice Centre. I know we advertised that Ipe Okasaki would be here as well, but he's unfortunately been unable to attend, but he did wonderfully prepare a video for us in amazingly short time. So we will share that with you upon the completion of this webinar. But I also, I'll hand over to Georgina to talk about the award-winning program that they're doing in South Australia. And she's going to talk about flood and bushfire legal need from a South Australian perspective.
Great, now I figured out the tech of it all. I would encourage people to have a look at Ipe's video. He's from CLC South Australia, and CLC South Australia does have an MOU with Housing Trust that gets activated in the event of an emergency or a disaster. So that's a really interesting element of what we do here in South Australia. And if you want more information about that, I would encourage you to watch that video. What I'll be talking to today is the work of community justice centres, which I work with specifically in the Riverland, which obviously was just impacted by the floods, and a program that we have under our umbrella, which is called the Disaster Legal Support Program, which is not bound by our catchment area. It's actually a statewide service that we deliver. It just so happens that a lot of the areas that are high risk fall within our catchment area. So it's kind of why we're best posed for that program. I wanted to start with a conversation around preparedness, which doesn't necessarily have any concrete data that I can refer to, but is a really important part of the process of our disaster legal support program. The focus has been on addressing gaps in knowledge for the community in the interest of preparedness. So under this program, we've developed community legal education events that can be wheeled out to any willing communities, particularly communities that are at risk, particularly just for bushfires events or flood events. Initially, we developed these resources in response to the 2019-2020 bushfires. So it was a synopsis of all the key information for people that may help prevent or at least mitigate future legal needs should a disaster happen. These were initially legal needs that were really identified by the original solicitor of this program, Holly McCoy, which I'm sure many of you have come across, and her work out in Kangaroo Island after the devastating fires there. So since my work with the floods in the Riverland, these resources have really been twinged and changed to acknowledge that these different events create very different legal needs and create the opportunity for very different disputes if we're talking about an insurance area. So there's amendments that need to be made when you're preparing this preparedness. It is certainly not a one-size-fits-all to every community. An example of this would probably be around total loss insurance claims. So it gets a little murkier when you add flood waters to the mix, and that was an unintentional pun. But the need for assessments and structural damage, engineer reports, arguments around floods versus storms, all of a sudden was becoming much more of an issue for our clients, whereas Holly was dealing largely with the kind of complete indisputable destruction that comes with bushfires. The benefit as well, for want of a better word, of the Murray River floods was that we did have a significant lead time. So ultimately, a lot of the pitfalls that we identified with bushfire clients in those early days of this program didn't necessarily catch out on Murray River clients because they had attended one of our seminars. We had disseminated information through the community and through the local councils, and it meant that insurance policies were checked, important documents were stored properly. All of those kind of things that could be done before were done, and it certainly lessens the need on resources after the events. Bushfires don't give you that time, so there is another way where those two things need to be treated differently. Now, I can't really speak to the data on how many clients didn't attend because I'd already gone out and chatted their ear off about insurance, but I can attest to clients that, you know, came up to me at community events throughout the floods and in the nearly a year since the floods, and kind of said, well, I did this because you told me, and I haven't actually needed to have one-on-one appointments with them. They've just already gotten an understanding of their basic rights and understanding of the basic dispute processes, and they've actually been able to manage and navigate those systems themselves. Obviously, there are people that don't have additional barriers like called communities, people with disabilities, people without access to technology, but it was really useful to empower people to pursue those processes by themselves where possible. This engagement as well continued throughout the flood events, and it morphed and refined as the needs of the clients altered. So there was further information on the pros and cons of a cash settlement. There was further information given on claiming additional accommodation costs due to delays caused by your insurer. Those kind of things that have been identified by community members and clients that were coming on for one-on-ones all of a sudden worked their way into, not all of a sudden, I worked them into the presentations I was giving to larger community groups. And that meant that that information wasn't just rehashing the same insurance crash course that we wheel out right at the beginning. It was altering it to the specific community needs, which was still general in nature because of the area. And then we get, you know, about 6 months ago, a little less than 6 months ago, they kind of ceased to have that much value. The people that needed advice still were at a really sticky end of their insurance. They were in disputes that may last a lot longer and had more specificity to them. So the advices to the masses, and when I say masses, I mean about 20 people in an RSL poll at a time, they were no longer requested by the communities. What we then kind of cycle back to is that general crash course, albeit a little bit less regularly, to make sure there's that general awareness. And as part of this, also doing community legal sector awareness. So having an understanding of the different services that are there, both with CLC South Australia in general, you know, different tenancy resources we have, different welfare resources we have, all of that, as well as national supports like the Financial Legal Rights Centre as well, that they are able to rely upon. And that kind of leads me to collaboration, which is a really important part of what we do as well. And we spend a lot of time working with other services and other service providers, both non-for-profit, government, to make sure that we're giving this information in the best way, and also those referral pathways are open. Of course, referrals pathways also have a massive impact on the legal need we're seeing. As in with preparedness, during the crisis and recovery, we are still continuing that engagement with local community groups like RSL, men's sheds, those kind of operations. However, we're also seeing that increased referrals from other non-for-profits, which tend to be financial counsellors, small business and family business support groups, and then also government agencies, which are making up another portion of our referrals. And because of the bulk of the referrals coming from services like that, they do tend to be very insurance-based. I wonder whether if, you know, chicken and egg, are our collaborations kind of putting us in that area where we're always going to be working with these insurance matters? Are there other matters that we're potentially missing? And that's why making sure you've got more grassroots community engagement going on as well is really important. In the Relief Centre itself, we had referrals from a much larger range of services, and the referrals were 2 seats over you, and you were, you know, having a smoko and a lunch break with them. So those referrals flowed very quickly as well. And we were picking up through those processes matters that weren't necessarily caused by the flood, but were certainly compounded by the flood, which meant I'm talking domestic violence matters, legal advice needed for welfare, Centrelink, all of those kind of issues kind of finding our way into in front of me at the Relief Centre. We found as well, particularly in bushfire areas, that are collaborations with CFS, MFS and SES for floods can be helpful to get bums on seats. It's really hard sell to say, do you want to come and listen to me talk about insurance for an hour? I swear it's interesting, particularly when there's no like imminent threat coming. So when an event isn't fresh in the community's mind, or when the news is not, awash with bushfire warnings and there isn't that imminent risk, people tend not to be interested. So becoming a one-stop shop, pairing with other services, can really make sitting through an insurance or a succession CLE a much more appealing sell. I know Jasmine, who's in this meeting today and works for our service, just went to Mount Gambier and the Limestone Coast region to do a number of different presentations where she collaborated with those services. Now onto the data. Best way to assess the legal need is looking at why people are coming to see us. Obviously, this is grabbed from class, which everyone knows how much fun I had doing that, or all the CLCs. It also, one of the things I think it does nicely is it shows that shift of legal need during the life of a disaster event. So the 2023 data shows advice after the event. Most of what's going into the 2023 is in relation to the floods, and it's in relation to, well, the floods really conveniently hit right at the end of December. So we are able to kind of make that line of this is what happened after that water had come through. What's happening in the 2022 one is a lot of the ends of our bushfire matters that were still kind of being resolved, and a bulk of what we were getting in the relief centres themselves. So when we were at the back end of the insurance disputes with bushfire matters, we were seeing an uptick in disputes around council regarding regulations, disputes with contractors where cash settlements meant homeowners were kind of self-managing their builds. And because KI was the region we were working with, obviously there's a lot of issues in terms of getting resources and building out to any disaster area, let alone a disaster area that is across a sea channel. All out there by themselves. The difference between flood and fire in relation to the general area doesn't really change. Like, it's an insurance dispute. The insurance code, the legislation applies to both of them, but it's the types of disputes that you're seeing that really,
Marianne, how are you?
that really come up as being different.
Back. How was your holiday?
I think
Mona, I think we can hear you.
I
If you could just mute yourself, please, Mona.
Also,
Yes.
we are at time, so I'll give you a bit of space to finish up.
Oh, okay. So what else I wanted to talk to briefly was, I'll talk to during the relief centre, we were getting a lot more of a broader range of matters, because we had DV matters coming in, we had tenancy matters where landlords or tenants were impacted, and we had crim matters coming in. They had to change bail addresses, they had to get adjournments. Whereas once everything is said and done and the disasters come through, you are shifting much more into that civil dispute insurance claim area once you're out of that initial crisis mode. Another thing I wanted to touch on briefly is the demographics. You'll see here that this applies really across flood and fire, that the ages, it is that higher age bracket. The incomes are actually more higher than our generalist team would be seeing just in our normal services. And also a lot more people from Metro. This demographic data here is all in relation to the flood. That is because the majority of the clients that were seeking assistance for the Murray River floods, actually it was SHAPs, retirement plans, and not primary residents. And that's why that Metro one is being so highly represented there. Just for interest, we also had English as a second language people that required a little bit more hands-on assistance. And in terms of what that assistance looked like, most of it was advice, some of it was tasks, and a lot of the ongoing stuff was just where there was that extra barrier that was preventing the client from able to kind of self-direct their own matters. However, I will say that most of the clients that came for assistance came for 3 to 5 legal advices about their matter, because they kept visiting us again and again throughout that dispute process. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I would like to listen for hours on that and know a lot more about it. Does anybody have any questions? I can't see maybe Georgie, if you could stop sharing your screen, we might be able to see if there are any questions from just I'm curious, just briefly about going back to what you mentioned before, because of that your engagement, South Australian engagement with communities seems quite deep, embedded, and consistent. And so it seems like you're picking up things that we would all like to pick up a lot more of. I'm wondering about that beginning model when you said that you're suddenly out there. There's a trigger that occurs due to funding, and then South Australian CLCs are actually on site as part of emergency management. I'm just wondering if you could give us some hope around whether that works or not and how it works.
I think it works for a lot of different reasons. One of them would be awareness. So for those that don't know, the Memorandum of Understanding gets triggered along with the relief centres. So it's Housing SA that give us a call and say, come on, we're opening a relief centre. You're going to sit there at your desk and you're going to give legal advice to people on the ground there. I found that really useful in the flood model because it meant that people were coming in and saying, I've got this domestic violence matter. I want to sue the local government because of where they put a levy. And I would say, great, great, great. And then I'd say, have you got your insurance policy here? Have you got your, and I would kind of force insurance advice upon them. And I think that was really helpful for getting, catching those people that were maybe at risk of being in a bad legal situation when they're initially presenting. I can't imagine, with a fire, it happens all a lot more suddenly. So you're not getting that lead time of the relief centre sitting there for weeks, being ready to have those conversations. And I understand that when Holly was in the Relief and Recovery Centre after the bushfires, it was much more a hands-on, trying to help people with documentation, trying to help people get back important documentation, those kind of things. So it's a really useful scenario, but in the interest of comparing floods and fires, it's a really good example of how a lawyer can be helpful in a crisis in two very different ways.
Right. There is so much to learn from this experience. It's been running for 3 years now, this program, no?
Yes, so it was triggered after the 2019 bushfires, and the floods was the first time we got kind of the whole thing in action for the first time. So that was the real trial run.
Thanks, Georgina. I think it'd be good to share at the end around to the audience the evaluation document about that service, because I think that I found that very insightful as well. Thank you. And now we're off to Tasmania. Unfortunately, you're last on the list, and that's nothing to do with where you are. And I just so we're off to hear from Ryan Gilmore and Jane Hutchinson from the Northwest Community Legal Centre. And we heard about you in a meeting with Dr. Mundy, who is doing the NLAP consultations, and he was waxing lyrical about how amazing your program is. So we're really, really grateful that you're able to attend today. So I'll hand over to both of you.
Very welcome, thank you. All right, anyone see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. All right, well, I'll start just by giving you a basic introduction.
Brian, the sound's a bit bubbly.
Yeah, I'm sure we can fix that.
Is it just me, or are other people finding?
Yeah, it's not coming through. If you have any headphones, Brian, that would probably be a quick fix.
Position before.
No.
Is that any better?
The slides are great.
Beautiful slides.
Not at all.
Maybe if you just speak a bit more, it sounds like it's stabilising a bit.
Sorry.
Maybe if you just start, Ryan, and we'll see if it works.
Oh, well, let's just see if it works. Well, my name is Mark Gilmore. I'm the coordinator and senior solicitor at the Northwest Community Legal Centre based in Devonport, Tasmania. We're a very initial regional community legal centre, one of 3 general CLCs in Tasmania, with 3 laws including myself.
Oh, it's so unfortunate. I mean, you sound like you're underwater. Is there headphones? Is there another solution? And then there's water on the screen as well. I really wanted to hear this.
So it's Mark Moran. Sometimes it helps if people's videos are off.
So all of us turn our videos off?
Worth a try.
It is worth a try. Another shot there, Ryan?
Yeah.
Still underwater. Is Jane's video?
Jane, what's for you?
I'm here. Do you want me to try? Am I clearer?
You're super clear, Jane. Oh, I'm so sorry, Ryan. I'm wondering if you went out and came back in or something.
Do you want to try or get some headphones, Ryan, and I'll start talking?
Oh,
Go around the way. Okay. So I'm Jane Hutchison. I recently stepped down as the chair of Community Legal Centres Tasmania, and also retired from the Hobart Community Legal Service after many, many years of being involved in community legal centres. The slide we've got in front of us here is we sort of feel usurpers here today because we really haven't had any natural disasters quite like what's happened in other areas. And at that previous slide, we've had basically 4 major sort of ones in the past. I've lived through 3 of them. We had the 67 bushfires down here, which did impact in a huge way. So 60 people were killed, thousands of people were homeless. But since then, we really haven't had much happen in the way of natural disasters. So I was very much involved in the Dunalley bushfire, which is on that slide where had the people clinging in the water at the end of a jetty. And I'd have to say, you know, we saw much of what has been explained so far with bushfires. And what I did find was that the community didn't want us down there initially. They were in shock. The last thing they wanted to think about were legal problems. They just wanted to get clothes on their back and a roof over their heads to start off with. And then they had time to think about their legal problems. So after about 3 or 4 weeks, we went down and started working out of the emergency hub that had been set up as well as the community house. What came very clear to us to start off with was what other people have mentioned was the need for fact sheets, and particularly around replacing important documents. And actually, believe it or not, fencing was a big one at Dunalley because people had lots of livestock that they needed to contain, and there were lots of sort of scratching of heads about replacing fencing. So they were the type of fact sheets we provided. Luckily, in some ways for us, there'd been a few years before the Marysville fires in Victoria and the 2011 Queensland floods, because I'm going back to 2013 talking about the Dunalley bushfires. And fortunately for us, maybe not so much for Victoria and Queensland, they'd managed to sort out a lot of the insurance problems that had arisen at that time. And we sort of went on their shirt tails. And I must admit, we didn't, it was more just explaining to people how to go about making your, to claim on your insurance, explaining what type of insurance they had, that type of thing. Whereas we did find the insurance companies were actually very well behaved, which was quite amazing. I also flew down a colleague from Victoria who was a absolute expert in insurance, credit advocate, and he gave a quick, a very good one-day seminar to our lawyers so they knew what to do. Has Ryan come back yet, or do I keep talking here? No, okay, I'll keep talking. So in Tasmania, as with most other states, I think it's part of NLAP, we do have the emergency legal response plan that's been developed by our Department of Justice. When I first became aware of this plan, I discovered that community legal centres weren't even mentioned on this plan. So after a bit of jumping up and down and creating a fuss, we were added. I must admit I was particularly crabby about it, because legal centres are the ones that actually help with insurance. And, you know, we actually can sort of drop everything and be in the community and help, compared to legal aid or even and the private practice.
Brian's back now, Jane, if you're...
I've just got onto the emergency legal response plan, Ryan. I've basically, but I probably don't need to really say much more about that if you want to talk about.
Thank you. I don't know if that's any better.
It's absolutely clear as a bell.
Fantastic. I got some headphones. All right, I'll screen share. Are you happy for me to go from here, Jane? Yes. All right, well, sorry about that, everyone. James had probably already touched on this while I was out, but we've been somewhat lucky, I guess, in Tasmania in that having a temperate climate, we've managed to avoid many of the more extreme natural disasters other states have experienced and are experiencing at the moment. In light of that, I guess the ambit of this presentation is quite broad, and that's for that particular reason. Hopefully, Jane, you've no doubt already given a bit of a grassroots snapshot of the experience in Dunalley, but I'll endeavour to give a bit of a grassroots snapshot of how the Northwest Community Legal Centre dealt with the 2016 floods. So 2016 was the warmest year on record for Tasmania. We had significant rainfall in June, which caused extensive flooding in the Mersey, Forth, Meander, Northwest, Southwest, Macquarie, Ouse and Derwent rivers. And to give those an idea, not from Tasmania or haven't visited Tasmania, that's very much the entire state that was affected by these floods. We are one of 3 generalist community legal centres in Tasmania, here at the Northwest Community Legal Centre, with a full-time equivalent staffing profile of 4.65, of which 3 are lawyers. So very much a small regional CLC responding to this event, with I guess a population base that we capture of around 120,000 people. So our response to the 2016 floods can be summarised as this. It was a very fast event. People went to sleep on the 5th of June 2016 and awoke to being underwater in their homes. A recovery centre was established very quickly, the very next day on the 6th of June, and all service providers essentially were attending that location, which was the Latrobe Memorial Hall, and we attended there too. In attendance there were various service providers, Salvation Army, Centrelink, Latrobe Council, Chaplains, TAS Networks, RACT, Department of State Growth, amongst others. Our senior solicitor attended there and continued to attend there every day for around 7 to 14 days. We spoke to obviously all the organisations that were present to make them aware of our service, to ensure that those that were the frontline responders could refer people to us and knew what we could do to assist. There were 2 other things we did as a centre which worked well and which we would do again should a similar event arise. They were to immediately contact the Law Society of Tasmania. The reason for that and the benefit of doing that was to ensure that non-priority group clients would be assisted in a streamlined and facilitated manner. The Law Society wrote to the directors of firms across the state to see what assistance they could provide at short notice, particularly in relation to small business owners. That was very helpful to try and reduce some of the demand. As I've indicated, with just 3 generalist lawyers, there was quite a bit of demand at the time, or I shouldn't say immediately after the event, but certainly in the weeks after and months after there was. The second thing we did was we contacted local private firms, which we maintain connections with, for the purposes of facilitated referrals to help those that needed more assistance than we could provide. That was successful. At the time, most firms had a waiting period of around 2 weeks or so before they would be able to see a client, but we were able to make contact with a number of firms that would reduce that to be able to see them immediately. In terms of statistics, now in preparation for today, I did have a look at our class, try and draw down some numbers. I haven't got any fancy graphs for you today, but I can give you some details. There were 5 clients that attended our service within about 10 days of the initial event. So to us, there's a clear indication that we're obviously not first responders. Our involvement comes in the weeks, months, and even years after the initial event itself. Indeed, the last client we saw, which I could directly link back to the floods through our records, was in late 2018, so the best part of 2.5 years after the initial event. In terms of the problem types, like you've seen from many of the other presenters today, very much insurance-based, to the tune of about 90%. And they included matters such as home insurance, car insurance, livestock. A lot of farmers in this area lost their cattle, were swept out into the Bass Strait. Underinsurance was a big issue. And also not having the right insurance. So one of the other things we saw was people not having, or small businesses, of which that makes up the bulk of businesses in our local area, didn't have business interruption insurance. And of course, with such demands on tradespeople and trying to get people back into businesses and rebuild homes, etc., that was really troublesome for a lot of people. There were tenancy matters, which we refer to the tenancy union. There were some planning issues with local council putting in some extra restrictions in terms of building slightly higher and whatnot to prevent this sort of thing happening again. And there were also some issues with documents as well. So people needing to reapply for birth certificates, and particularly the elder demographic that needed help with some of those tasks. In terms of the lessons, I've tried to summarise them on this slide in terms of what we may have learned generally from that experience. Firstly, our work is not of immediate need. As I've indicated, it very much, the statistics show from our office at least, that work came in the weeks, months, and even years after the event. The need to maintain connections with stakeholders in the community, including local councils. It's pointless trying to create connections at the time where everyone's rushing around and everyone's very much overworked trying to help people. As a regional CLC, I think it's probably similar across the country, I would imagine. There's a need to maintain connections year round. You must embed yourself in the community to make sure people are aware of who you are, what you do, how you can assist, because there's no time in the event of a natural disaster to try and get that message out. When it comes to community legal education, it's perhaps less advantageous when it comes to the natural disaster response, because most of the problems are very much one-on-one assistance. There's a caveat to that, and that is, I think the general brand awareness that comes from community legal education generally is of great assistance in times of need, where you need word of mouth from friends and family to direct people as to where they can get appropriate assistance. The other issue that I guess became more prevalent or became a bigger issue as a result of the 2016 floods is the need to have a more streamlined referrals so that no one organisation is overwhelmed. Now, we are a state without a funded peak, which makes it slightly more difficult. And Jane, I believe you may have spoken a little bit about this before I rejoined us, but the need for an overall disaster recovery plan became immediately obvious after this 2016 event. And that's indeed what we have been working on between the Law Society, various CLCs, Tasmania Legal Aid, etc., over recent years. And we review it as a standing agenda item twice a year.
Brian, unfortunately, we're over time, but is it okay to finish now? But we also have a question in the chat from Debbie. So the slideshow mentions that as a CLC, you handed out information packs after the event. What type of material did you include?
So the material was our general information sheet about who we are, what we do, all our contact information, magnets, pens, a standard type of information pack that we would normally hand out at a CLE type event. It was deliberately done that way in terms of I stand back and let people know who we are, how they can contact us. And we felt that worked quite well as a result. So we'd probably do that again, but that was the general information pack.
Great, thank you. It's quite confirming to hear very similar messages from across Australia in terms of some of the lessons learned and the knowledge that we can pass on or share with each other. So thank you, Tasmania, Jane and Ryan. And I'm sure hopefully there'll be more conversations going forward and we can learn a lot more collectively. And so part of that is I wanted to introduce Bill Mitchell from Townsville Community Legal Centre, who's going to do a reflect back and a summary of what we've learned today. And also Bill is the co-convener with myself of the Disaster and Climate Justice National Working Group that we will invite you all to attend, where we can continue these conversations. But Bill, over to you for some reflections on what you've heard today.
Okay, thanks, Monica and Bronwyn, for trusting me with this task. My apologies for getting here a bit late. I've had Zoom troubles all week. I'm on Wulgurukapa and Bindal land, and I acknowledge them as never having ceded Gurrumbul Borough, which is also called Townsville. On my way to work this morning, I had a heat wave warning, and I also saw and heard some storm birds calling out and Torres Strait pigeons, which means that cyclone season started here. We all know that to be the case. I know many of you are probably feeling burnt out, swamped, inundated. We can't help but make kind of unintentional slips when we're talking about this stuff, and that's okay. I've made some notes about each of the speakers, and I'm going to just touch on them all in turn, and I'll send these notes to Monica and Bronwyn so they can be collated. Julia obviously spoke about data. We need anecdotes and qualitative experiences, but we also need qualitative data. We need granularity and specific data so we can really pinpoint consumer experience. And that can be built into our systems like CLASS, but as they said in that famous movie, we need a bigger boat or at least a better system. We talked about the use of keywords, building a taxonomy, which I think is great. And this use of pivot tables may not be our natural inclination, but it is critical to understand how to analyse the data better. If we do this, we can make more accurate reports, we can make better advocacy arguments about system and structural reforms. And to mix our metaphors, or to mix Julia's metaphors, we are the canary in and at the coalface of the coal mine. It also allows us to report on the intersectionality of disaster and to be agile in our work. There will be errors and we need to clean data, but analysis is critical so we can dissect it. And she gave some excellent examples of exactly how that's been used: reports, inquiries, industry regulation, and actively influencing policy at a very high level. And I think it was a fantastic presentation that showed us when we get smart about data, we can do an awful lot with it. Simon then from Victoria looked at progressing towards preparedness. He acknowledged, as I do, that much of our work occurs on the land of First Nations people, and this is something we need to keep in the back of our mind always. Perhaps one of the most important cases in recent times, the Torres Strait 8, is for those people way up to the north that often are forgotten about, and that case is all about resilience. He talked about cascading events, increasing frequency, and sometimes it all happens almost all at once, or at least within a year, within a season. Dealing with big areas, typically small teams. We need to remind ourselves about the human aspects of this work for our clients, for our communities, but also for ourselves. That expectation chart was fantastic. It isn't the reality. Government sees it differently. And the timeframes are longer and don't fit. And this rhetoric about recovery has been, put to paid many times, including, as I've often talked about, the experience of Hurricane Katrina, which was at least a 10-year tail on the disaster. Lots of complexity. It's never a one-size-fits-all experience. We do need to engage with new areas of law, but we also need to get and recruit competence in those areas. The legal survey was interesting. It shows us what the legal needs are, but also just how little people affected understand how and why they were affected. The distinction between preparedness and recovery is arbitrary, and this continuum, or this smush, as Bronwyn called it, is really something we need to get our head around. These things don't happen in a neat, orderly fashion. They happen and overlap and feed into each other. David, Simon also mentioned how we retain our knowledge, and lessons management has come up lots of times today from people. It's an emergency disaster. It's an emergency term that's used widely, and I think we need to take some notice of that. We have lots of lessons management to gain. I don't like that word learning, so I won't use it. David gave a fantastic experience from a remote ARCHO. Very different experience, one where we're cut off entirely from services, including those that satisfy our basic human needs. A very large catchment with disparate communities, predominantly Aboriginal people. And offers of help can be welcome, but also a burden. The imposition of a model on communities, how's that going to work? Is it appropriate? Actually, it's not right now. So there's this disconnect between the community and those that are looking from the outside in. Keeping track of bureaucracy who aren't on the ground, they may be well-intentioned, but equally misinformed, out of touch, and it can bring I've got a shed load of complexity in itself, and then in the end, you don't even get the money. So it's a big job brokering all this information and determining priorities. The roles and responsibilities need to be set in advance, but importantly, community-led. Importing policies and programs and priorities just might not work. The legal needs of one community will not be those of everyone. And so he called for a reframing and rather than identifying legal need, really identifying service gaps and necessary baselines in funding to respond and create resilience. Jackie and Magda spoke about a metro, but also statewide experience. They talked about impact across many local government areas, adding to complexity. All these various arms of government getting involved creates a whole lot of accessibility problems for clients. And I was really interested to hear about the local neighbourhood centre service navigators, which is clearly an excellent model which we can think about partnering with or furthering in other places. The fact that resilience work's established under regulations means it's enforceable, but often more complex. And there's lots of unknowns in this work, how insurance and body corporate and other things intersect. But the realities of life for these clients are trade shortages, project management by themselves, temporary accommodation, loss of employment, which is potentially amplified in the 4R communities. We saw there were many layers of review, and of course, many are beyond the average person, for example, judicial review. Lots of complex financial decisions to be made by those clients, some that leave them with invidious choices. Do I remain and stay at risk, or do I move and be worse off financially? So again, the impacts on low income people raises its head. That is the equity piece that people hear me bang on about a lot. Georgie gave us a really interesting presentation on the mixed model, which has to include client work and education and community development work. She also mentioned the need for specialisation across other areas we're not already in, but also calling on specialists in the areas we are in, such as welfare rights and tenancy. But also she made clear that legal issues can be region specific. Knowledge gaps are a preparedness piece in preempting what are known community needs. It's hard to combine the impacts of different disasters, flood versus bushfire, in terms of law and timing. Empowerment can be seen within communities if you work for them long enough, and I thought that was a really excellent observation that she was seeing, or they're seeing clients come back who are more prepared, or at least know to ask to be more prepared. So I think she made a good case for an empowerment model if you can work with communities over time. Collaboration is the key, many agencies involved. Are we creating a self-fulfilling prophecy with the work we do and the partnerships we build in terms of the work we then see? Maybe, but also we need to pay attention to the demographics and do what we can to ensure we're targeting our priorities. Important, everyone made this point to do your own data analysis to see what you're doing, how it shifts over time, what you aren't seeing. And finally, Ryan and Jane, different sorts of experiences down there. The point was made that we're not first responders, and often our intuition to be there early may not be the best move. Again, the use of emergency hubs, but again, location-specific issues. They're able to piggyback on the work done by other colleagues across the sector, which I think is critical because we're often reinventing this wheel from scratch, and there are clearly some common frameworks we can apply. CLCs being place-based is an important aspect of responding, and outreach collaborations were central to the work that was done. And I think that's all I had, folks.
Amazing, Bill. What a fantastic wrap up and summary. So yes, applause coming from various pockets of my screen. We have reached the end of the proceedings today. I really want to, in closing out the session, sincerely thank all of the speakers for the time they took to prepare their presentations and deliver them in such an engaging style. Also to thank everybody who was so attentive. We've had a really solid audience throughout this 2-hour block, which is no mean feat in the days of Zoom fatigue. So you've all done very well to be so attentive and so lively and engaging in the chat. So thank you very much for your engagement as well. Thank you to Leah and thank you to Gabby from CLCQ and the Federation for the back-end support. We will be making available the slides that were presented today at a later date. So we'll circulate that when that's ready. And we are also really, really keen, please, to get your feedback. So there is a survey that will be either popped in the chat or circulated shortly afterwards by email. Do take the time because we want to be able to curate these events to pitch at the right level and make sure that people are getting information that they want so that we can continue to co-learn and co-create these sorts of sessions. That is really it from us. We've all done a terrific job, 2.5 hours. You do get half an hour back in your day. Wishing everybody, I guess I'm going to say it, a happy Christmas, and hope that summer is restorative and relaxing, as well as potentially full of some work for us all. All right, goodbye everybody. That's it for us now.
Thanks everybody.